My heart is steadfast, O God. I will sing and make melody with all my being. Awake, O harp and lyre. I will awake the dawn. I will give thanks to you, O God, among the peoples. I will sing praises to you among the nations, for your steadfast love is great above the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches to the clouds. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth, that your beloved ones may be delivered. Give salvation by your right hand and answer me. God has promised in his holiness, with exultation I will divide up Shechem and portion out the valley of Succoth. Gilead is mine, Manasseh is mine, Ephraim is my helmet, Judah my scepter, Moab is my wash basin. Upon Edom I cast my shoe, over Philistia I shout in triumph. Who will bring me to the fortified city? Who will lead me to Edom? Have you not rejected us, O God? You do not go out, O God, with our armies. Oh, grant us help against the foe, for vain is the salvation of man. With God we shall do valiantly. It is he who will tread down our enemies. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Linda. I also want to extend a welcome to you. I'm Pastor Pete. If this is your first Sunday with us, this is a good day to be here. The small group relaunch going on. After the service in the Commons, we'll have our small group leaders out there. Make sure you pick up a card, meet somebody. You can scan the QR code, find the options for groups, and we really would love to connect. This is a really good group to be in. But it's a big group. So you will get so much more connected with folks if you get into one of our groups, a Bible study class, a small group, or a discipleship pairing. So we want to strongly encourage that. Most of the time, when I think of courage, I think of a firefighter rushing in to a house that's burning. Or the men who stormed the beaches of Normandy, knowing what was going to happen to them. Or somebody who opposes sex trafficking at the street level, because you mess with those dealers and your life's going to be threatened. It takes courage. Like, I think of courage as that which is willing to stand in the face of fear and threat. And that is true. It takes courage to face death. But it also takes courage to face life. It takes courage to do things in life. For example, it took courage for the 17-year-old Philip Riley. Many of you know Philip and Nicole Riley. Philip is very introverted, very quiet, very reserved. It took courage for him to stand up in high school as he was 17 and sing the lead role for Les Mis. I mean, he was Jean Valjean. Can you see Philip being Jean Valjean and singing on the platform in front of everybody, to stand up and make everybody looking at you, no one else to hide behind. You're exposed, you're vulnerable, to stand up in front of people and be unguarded like that, to be the target of criticism. You make one mistake and everybody makes fun of you for the next 2 weeks. Like, that's hard to do. That takes courage. And that's when it hit me. It does take courage to sing. It takes courage to sing. That's what I want to talk about today. The courage to sing, not in the high school musical or in a college band, but the courage to sing in and with the gathered church. That takes courage. It takes courage to sing in and with the people of God who are gathered. It takes courage to sing as an act of Christian worship, to sing your faith when life is really confusing, to sing your hope when you feel hopeless, to sing love when you've had a week where you wonder, does anybody really love me? Care about me? Like, it takes courage to sing in those moments. I want you to think about that with me this morning, because there may be some things that are keeping you from singing in the gathered church or singing freely. You might say something like this. I did, when I first came to faith, I had a song in my heart, and I sang out loud, and I was at the church one Sunday, and I was singing, and I was liking this, and I was like, yeah, I'm voicing God, I'm confessing my faith, I'm voicing praise to God, and I was singing along, and everybody stopped, and I kept singing, and I was utterly embarrassed. Has that ever happened to you? And so from that point on, I just thought I'll just back it down. I'll sing in the safe zone. I'll just kind of whisper it. I'll just move my lips. I want to talk to you today. I want to talk to you who are either unwilling to sing or hindered in the midst of your singing or self-conscious about your voice or your sound. I don't sound like him. Oh, that guy's got a great voice. My voice is not good. I don't sing next to, I don't sit there next week because I sit next to that person. I really would like for you to think about the courage that it takes to sing. Psalm 108 is going to help us think about the courage it takes to sing for the glory of God. 3 simple points. I'm probably only going to do 2, and all God's people said, amen. Easy. So three simple points: courage to sing, courage to love, and then courage to surrender. I'm probably not going to get to courage to surrender, but that's the last half of the psalm. Pastor Chip, as we move toward communion, will say a brief word about that. David is not just a warrior who has the courage to fight. He also has the courage to surrender. And I'll just hold that thought there, and you can watch for what happens at the end of the psalm. But I at least want to talk to you about the first 2, and they are the courage to sing and the courage to love. Number 1, it takes courage to sing. Look at verse 1. Where are you getting this? Well, I'm picking up courage from verse 1 of Psalm 108. So look at this with me. Again, we're in the Pew Bible on page 507. I'd love for you to see this with your own eyes. David, the psalmist of Israel, the king of Israel, and the psalm writer, says in verse 1, "My heart is steadfast, O God. I will sing and make melody with all of my being. My heart is steadfast." We don't know the precise context of this psalm, but we do know that the first 5 verses of Psalm 108 are originally from Psalm 57. And you may recall that that is the psalm David wrote after God delivered him from Saul in the cave. And so this is like a remix. This is like a mashup. He's taken something from 57 and he's rewritten it in Psalm 108. And the lyrics are still the same, but it's a new song for a new context. We don't know the new context. We don't know exactly what's happening, but we would imagine that there's an inspiration behind this song that goes something like this. This decisive moment of trusting God in deliverance elicits a heart of praise for David. And that's what happens again in Psalm 108, whatever the context might be. And whatever is happening in this remix, we know this: David is not. He is emphatically not giving himself a pep talk to go out and be a great king and conquer the nations. That's not where this psalm takes us. This is not an assertion of his self-confidence. This is instead a settled confession of faith, an act of worship by David. My heart is steadfast, he says in verse 1, means that he gets his courage to lead Israel from the Lord, not from himself. To be steadfast is to have a courageous resolve to stand firm, and not just in battle, but to stand firm and sing. To have the courage to sing. I will sing, he says. My heart is steadfast. My heart is resolved. My heart is immovable. Oh God, I will sing and make melody with all my being. And I love the way verse 2 describes this, because there's this poetic imagery at work. Darkness is that time of day when fears tend to rise. Darkness is that time of day that is a word picture for the hard parts of life. And here's what David says: I will get up in the morning, and instead of being afraid of the suffering surrounding me, I will awaken the dawn. His singing, his voice, his playing of the harp and the lyre, I will awaken the dawn, is a statement of his confidence in God as the sun rises. And he looks upon this next day. Courage, singing, faith, all swirling around in David's heart. You should try that some morning, by the way, while it's still summertime. Get up while it's warm. Go to bed early. Don't stay up all night watching stuff. Go to bed early. Get up early and sing at sunrise. Something simple. And strengthen your faith. Strengthen your faith for the day that's going to come and the darkness that will fall again that night. One thing that I have observed about church life is, this is hard. One thing I've observed about church life is that some people disappear when things get hard in their own personal life. They withdraw. Might be a divorce, too embarrassed to come back here. Might be a financial crisis, job loss, again, shame, don't want to. Might be the death or loss of a loved one who I can't get through the grief. And so people withdraw, tend to distance themselves from the church, which is really ironic, because this is the place that you have the most prospect for success through your suffering. To be around other people who are not going to judge you, but are going to sing with you, pray with you, walk with you, love you in the midst of your brokenness and suffering. This is a room full of suffering saints. There's not a person in this room who has their act together. If you do think you have your act together and you're a religious, good, perfect religious person and you got your act together, you're probably at the wrong church. Back to Philip and Nicole. Do you know what Philip and Nicole did when their little baby Joel was born to them, and they knew they only have him for an hour or so? The doctor said he's not going to make it. You might have him for an hour. They had him for about a half of an hour. You know what they did? Well, they had this little precious life for a half an hour as they were saying goodbye to him. You know what Philip and Nicole did with Joel? They sang to him. Wow. They sang Psalm 139. They sang Psalm 16. They sang the hope of the gospel in the midst of their suffering. I understand that something's going to want to pull you away from the church and pull you away from the gospel and pull you away from people when you go through hard stuff. I get that. But don't let it. Sing your way into a place of experiencing God's grace. It takes courage to do it, but nothing will strengthen you more, right, than with the gospel to face those fears. It takes courage to sing. And not just on a Sunday morning. Secondly, it takes courage to love. This is in verses 4, 5, and 6. Courage to love. Verse 4, I think, is one of the keys to getting the true sense of the psalm. Notice, if you're taking notes and you want to hang on to this, notice the direct connection between the language of steadfast in verse 1 and steadfast in verse 4. Do you see that? My heart is steadfast. Verse 4, for your steadfast love is great and amazing. It extends beyond the heavens. My heart is steadfast because there's a causal link in verse 4. It starts with for. It starts with cause. It's like cause and effect. My heart has been so profoundly affected by the steadfast love of God that exceeds and transcends the heavens. It's like David saying, the love of God is big and amazing and extends everywhere, but it's not just out there. It has come down to me. It has touched me. It's changed me. It's saved me. It is remaking me. Your love is doing something inside of me. The love of God changes the heart of man from insecurity to security and rest, from fear and anxiety and worry to peace and shalom, to courage. Like the love of God. I never thought about this before Psalm 108, but the love of God, the effect of the love of God, when you bask in the love of God, when you know the love of God, when you experience the love of God, it will make you a courageous person. You just won't be afraid of stuff as much anymore. Not because you're going to go out and conquer the world, but because God conquers all things, right? The Apostle John, who personally experienced the love of God in the face of Jesus Christ, so much so that he was known as the beloved disciple, the disciple who uniquely captured what it felt like to be loved by Jesus. He wrote this in 1 John chapter 4. Some of you know this. You can probably finish it. Perfect love casts out fear. You remember that? Perfect love casts out fear. Whoever fears has not been perfected by love. Not morally perfected. He doesn't mean morally perfected like, he's not talking about declared righteousness or imputed righteousness or anything. He's talking about living into the fulfillment of love, the completion of love. And so if I'm anxious, if I'm afraid, if I'm struggling, if I'm living under fear of death, fear of judgment, fear of any other crippling thing, it betrays an absence of my confidence in the love of God for me. So this is so practical, incredibly practical. The love of God, I thought it was a big thing up there. No, it will help you down here to not be afraid of stuff. That's amazing. That's the power of the gospel. Now let me take one more step on this point. So God's love is so powerful that it not only overcomes fear in me, but it gives me the courage to love other people. Because it takes courage to love others. What do you mean? I mean, it takes courage to risk love on other people, to open yourself to someone. Think back to the first time you really got serious with your spouse, and you're like, man, am I going to say I love you? Is this the time? What if I say I love you and she doesn't say that back? Dude, that's an epic fail. But it could happen because love is risky. Exposing yourself, giving yourself, moving towards someone else requires overcoming the fear of being rejected. So we need courage not only to give love, but also to receive love. Look down at verse 6 at the word beloved. Do you see that in there? We are the beloved of God. David is thinking of himself and the saints of God as those who not only know the steadfast love of God, but have received it personally, that your beloved ones, and he's even thinking about them and loving them well. So the language of beloved is about receiving love. So we need the courage to both love and to receive the love of other people. Some of us are probably better at our conception of love going this way, thinking we know what love is going this way, but we really struggle with detecting and receiving love from others. This week, Tom Oster, he's in the first service this morning. He had our devotion for our all-staff meetings. We had a great all-staff meeting this week to kind of relaunch for the fall, and Tom kind of pastored us and shepherded us for about a half an hour, 45 minutes, and he was talking about the unconditional affection of God, living under the smile of God, not the frown of God, but living under his smile. And he talked about how resistant we are to living under the smile of God, to living under his affection. He said, if you're not learning to love more, to both give and receive more love, if you're not really learning to love more, you're probably not taking your discipleship to Jesus as seriously as you should, because Jesus said things like this: as the Father has loved me, I've loved you. Do you remember this? As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now, go and love an unlovable, lost world. That's what Jesus was saying. So Tom was talking to us about how hard it is to receive the love of Jesus and really live in the love of Christ. And let it, and bask in the love of Christ and embrace the love of Christ. We would so much rather earn it or work for it or choke it down or be in control of it, right? There's some love happening. You should turn that down. That's just what we're more comfortable with. So Tom gave this illustration. He's reading a book, new book that came out about Richard Nixon, new presidential biography about Richard Nixon, our 37th president of the United States, who, by all accounts, was both a brilliant and tragic figure in the American presidency. Here's the excerpt that Tom introduced us to. The book is called One Lost Soul by Daniel Silman, if you're interested. And here's the scene. It's the night before Nixon resigns because of Watergate. If you don't know what Watergate is, you can do a little homework. But it's the night before Nixon resigns. He'd be the only person to resign in midterm presidency. And he's going to resign because of the Watergate scandal. On that night, Henry Kissinger, his Secretary of State, two of the most powerful men in the world, alone in the White House. And Kissinger sees him. The only light that's lit in the White House on the second floor is where he's sitting in the Lincoln sitting area, outside of the Lincoln bedroom. And he's got a yellow pad of paper, and he's making notes. He's got a glass of brandy, and he just looks absolutely hopeless. Kissinger, the biographer writes, Henry Kissinger, a Jew who escaped the Holocaust, thought Nixon looked like an object lesson from God. Boom, he could just see it. The man who cared so much about strength had every weakness exposed. The man who cared so much about privacy was humiliated in the most public way. The man who fought so hard every enemy had become his own enemy. So Kissinger didn't know what to do. He chose to move forward and step toward him. So he went toward the president and tried to console him without much success. But then before he left, Nixon said to Kissinger, listen to this, we should pray together. Nixon was raised a Quaker. He was raised very religious. I think he even had a relationship with Billy Graham. Some of you may remember this. But his faith was not real. Nixon asked Kissinger to get down on his knees with him and pray. He had never asked that before. Henry, he said, you're not a very Orthodox Jew, and you know I'm not a good Quaker, but we need to pray. The two men, the biographer writes, the two men knelt by the bed next door in the Lincoln bedroom. So they went into the Lincoln bedroom, just the two of them. And the president took Kissinger's hand and grabbed it and started to pray, and he began to weep. It was as if something had broken inside of him. What have I done? What have I done? He cried out. After they finished praying, Kissinger decided to give him some space, and he went back down to his office on the other side of the White House. And two aides were there waiting for him. Well, what's going to happen? Is Nixon going to resign? What's going to happen to you? What's going to happen to us? And there's this mounting tension, and he begins to tell them, well, I don't know, but we prayed. And the president is very broken right now. He was even weeping. Just then the phone rings from upstairs. President Nixon on the other end of the line. Kissinger picks up the phone. Nixon says to Kissinger, hey, whatever you do, don't tell anybody about this. Well, it's too late. Especially, it's okay if you tell them we prayed, but don't tell them that I broke down, that I was weeping. Kissinger was stunned by that. And as the biographer writes, everything in the world was falling apart around him, and the whole world could see it falling apart. And Nixon could not make peace with his own vulnerability. He could not accept his human need for grace. He could not believe that if people heard he was crying alone in a dark White House, trying to write a resignation letter, he couldn't believe that they would have some compassion for him. And then this is the money line. Here it is. Kissinger said this. Can you imagine what Nixon might have been like if someone had really loved him well? If he'd experienced being loved by someone? Can you imagine what he would have been like, what kind of a man, what kind of a leader he would have been if he'd let other people into his life? Really into his life.